Welcome to Chai Pe Kharcha, where we have conversations on personal finance among four NRI professionals working at tech firms. Think of these like water cooler chats you have at the office. Only this time, you will have Ishan, Madhvesh, Rohit, and Siddharth as colleagues you will be listening into. Before we get started, a quick disclaimer. We are not financial experts. The content provided in this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. Always consult with a qualified financial professional if you need financial advice. Welcome back. We will continue from where we left off in the last episode with Aditi. Hope you enjoy the show.
So, Aditi, let's move on to a different topic now, and let's talk about this from the perspective of like real world people, right? Like in your experience working with your clients, are there some common themes or poor practices or mistakes that we might say that you have seen, especially with NRIs? Can you talk about that and maybe tips on how they might want to fix that?
Hmm. So, see, firstly, I think not saving enough is
Hmm.
something that really comes up very often. Like people don't have liquidity.
Okay.
And so there are a couple of reasons for that. First reason is always that they are tied up with some kind of real estate loan
Hmm.
back in India and they are
Yep.
paying off, right? So for me, I think my perspective on this is if you have bought that property to live in, that's
Mhm.
fine. If it is for consumption, it's okay. But you're buying it for investment and on loan, it's not a good proposition because if you understand, like cost of borrowing is higher in India, right? So in that sense, like the yield is not much in India. And for that, you're kind of, you don't have, you're losing out on the opportunities in the other asset classes.
Hmm.
But that's one of the reasons. The other reason is also that people move on, like as in move out of India to Singapore or at maybe not very sufficient salary. So what happens is that if you're not, I think that if you're not able to save 20% of your salary in Singapore, I
Hmm.
think you might just want to reflect on it. Like, what are you doing? Like, either just go back to India on on maybe a lesser, lower pay, but at least there you would be able to save something because we know, or we all know, like Singapore is expensive right now because of inflation, rent,
Yep.
everything is quite high. So I suggest that when people are moving out from India to Singapore, when they are considering an offer, salary offer, they
Mhm.
should see that they, after all their expenses, they are able to save at least 20% from that salary. So that's one thing. Second thing I feel is that again, like it's a common theme that comes up is people don't know enough and then they send majority of their money back to India, invest there.
Mhm.
So this is out of ignorance, of course. Second reason could be also out of convenience because they understand India market
Yeah.
better. So, but I feel like, if you see in a longer run,
Hmm.
you're heavily concentrated in India market. So if something has to happen in India stock market, your everything goes down, right? You have not hedged yourself against that risk. So that's something that people should understand and at least talk to professionals. Like that's my pet peeve. Third pet peeve is that people don't talk to professionals. They feel that they're going to sell something, so they run away, right? But I feel that it's good to talk to people, like at least know that your baseline, where are the gaps in your wealth accumulation phase, and maybe they're able to advise you something better, like so always be open to advice and open to professional, talking to professionals.
Mhm.
So yeah, these are very common themes that come up, like these are like all everyday conversation.
Yeah, yeah, I think I'm definitely guilty of at least two of those. Uh,
Which one? First two?
well, first one, luckily, not so much, but the second one, I am personally very concentrated in India, which
Hmm,
I'm trying to change now.
hmm,
And don't think like as I mentioned, I do have a advisor in India, but I haven't taken the time to engage with a professional here in Singapore to make sure that I'm making the right choices with my money, and so that is definitely a
Hmm.
which I'm hoping to fill soon enough. Sid Madhesh.
Yeah, I think I am the only outlier in the group who is not pro advisor, and
Hmm.
the main reason for me is that like I have come across certain people who are like they don't really care about the client, and the only thing they care about is like mis-selling products which should help their own portfolio per se.
Hmm.
I think that's one of the concerns that I have when I talk with advisors. But definitely, your like talking with you today has helped me to change some of my perspectives.
But to be honest, I would also say that not everybody is my client. I mean, people who really need help, who don't have time at all, who don't have interest in investments, who do not have any sort of, acumen towards investment, they are the people, but they have liquidity and they have money, and they have the similar personal goals. They have the same personal goals as us, right? So for them, it definitely makes sense to hire an advisor. There are people, and I'll tell you, people who also work in financial sector in different ways, but they don't have time. And you need to also understand that even for an advisor, right, I also have to automate a few things, because manually to fiddle around with your portfolio every day, I could also make a manual, like a error. So that the job of an advisor is to also give you a framework for your investments. So a portion of it, like what Madhvesh said, portion of it you must outsource it. That's my, at least my, what I think of, that at least 30 or 40% you outsource.
Mhm.
Rest, if you are okay, 60% you do DIY.
Yeah,
What's the big deal,
yeah,
right?
makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense.
एक एक सवाल है before we
बिल्कुल.
move on to another topic.
Go for it.
Aditi, this is based on something that you mentioned. कि लोग over pivot towards India investments.
Hmm.
Is there a good proportion कि इतना इंडिया में डालो इतना बाहर डालो? और when I say बाहर, even someone living in Singapore does not necessarily have to invest in Singapore only. They can
Yeah.
do it in US and other places also.
Basically, the point is not to have an exposure to India. Point is to putting your INRs or dollars basically to India, right? You can have the same India exposure from Singapore. So
Hmm.
so point is not कि इंडिया का एक्सपोजर नहीं होना चाहिए. Point is कि you should not be sending your dollars 100. जैसे अगर आपके पास $100 है, so you should be only, I would to say don't send anything, but in still if you want to send, at least send 20 to 30% of it, not more than that. So rest you put here, and if you want India exposure, do it from here. There are mutual funds. Abhi India ke mutual funds are also, some of these platforms are have made it available, and there are different international funds which are focused on India. So you can have the same exposure here as well.
So,
Yeah.
sorry, again. So what you're saying is कि we should be protecting the currency rather than uh, the market, or like, rephrase it.
See,
हाँ.
yeah. So basically, see, इसमें दो, there is like two themes here. First is India market का exposure, and the second is the exposure to INR. ठीक है? If you see historically, INR SG exchange rate,
Hmm.
1923, I was just checking it today before this call. So 1923, it used to be one SGD was around 26 or 27.
Okay.
2016, when I came, was around 48, 49. That time, that ballpark figure was that.
Hmm.
Now, right now in 2023, it's 61.
Yeah.
Okay, so you need to understand some structural issues with India. India mein inflation is inbuilt. Okay,
Hmm.
and our economy is such that we are 80%, we import our oil, so we are always, our inflation is kind of is triggered by that import of oil. And right now abhi jo Israel Gaza war hua hai, that is the problem right now. Again, the oil has prices have gone up, and this will affect India's inflation and again depreciate the currency. And Most of our oil is also coming from Middle East, which is a very turbulent, geography. So if you calculate vis-a-vis Singapore, INR is depreciating by 3 to 4% every year. So let's say if it continues like this, you are basically losing out on that currency depreciation. If you actually draw it on Excel, I did that exercise before to convince some of the people that, let's say you have $100 right now in Singapore and you are putting in India. So abhi ka rate is 61. आज का rate, ठीक है? You are putting 6100, you have put, and 61 जो है 6100, it's growing at 8%, ठीक है? And the end value of it, when you compare it with the scenario when you keep your $100 in Singapore and invest in Singapore and grow it at $8, you will see a difference of about 4 to 5,000 rupees. So वो जो capital appreciation में जो आप currency appreciation में people are losing, currency depreciation में people are losing, that is what I mean by why they should not be putting dollars in India, sending dollars back to India, right? And not just currency thing, it's also about, because as NRIs, our problems are also a little complex. Some people in Singapore, they might have a longer view of staying in Singapore. Their kids will be growing in Singapore. The kids who have grown in Singapore may not, of course, they will not go back and settle in India, but they might also not settle in Singapore. They might be in some other country, right? I see kids around me, they are completed NS and now they are doing graduation in Canada or Australia or, what have you. So sending money or capital controls from Singapore is so easy. Moving money in and out of Singapore is really easy. But from India, historically, India has had capital controls, right? So you never know. कल को कुछ नया regulation आ जाएगा कि you can't take out money beyond certain limit. Then you are stuck. Right? So if you're going to use that money in India, then it's fine. But if you are that kind of a family who's not looking to move to India in 10 to 15 years time, then it's very logical to have a portfolio going on in Singapore.
Yeah, that's a really good perspective. Something I've never thought about before. Cool. I'm really glad we get to talk to you today, Aditi. And then, if I may ask, personally for yourself, what kind of portfolio positions have you taken? Or for your clients, what's like the most recommended portfolio that you see yourself suggesting?
It depends again on the client's profile. Like I'll give you two examples here. So firstly, of course, I need to ask them. Most of these people who are my clients are in their 30s, okay, and have a long-term, view on investments. So, for instance, there's a client of mine who's about 38 years, business owner. So when they are business owner, they also have fluctuating income. He's not investment savvy. He has no exposure to US stocks and not even India. So he's basically in Singapore for a very long time. And although he's Indian origin, but he's not based in India. He's from Nepal. So again, like it's got many geographies going on. So he's actually a Nepali, but an Indian, and Singapore citizen.
Okay.
Right.
Wow.
With Nepal, the thing is capital control is a huge risk. Like you can't take out money from Nepal. So you have to, so that's why he has chosen Singapore as his base forever. Like for him, there is no other option. Right. The thing is also currently when I first met him as actually my good friend. He's somebody who's a risk averse kind of a person. His portfolio was all low risk guaranteed solution, right? And low risk guaranteed solution which generally give you 2 to 3%. So imagine like 2 to 3% में आप कितना wealth grow कर लोगे? Like, so I kind of, and he's also not somebody who's going to monitor his portfolio very often.
Okay.
Right. So for him, I needed something which gives him long-term capital appreciation and which is a kind of a fuss-free, the instrument. So I suggested him an ILP, and the mutual funds that I selected also are something which are long-term growth funds. So something like World Tech, Health Science, which is an all-weather sector. I gave him an India exposure as well because he didn't have anything in India going on. Then I also gave him Japan dividend exposure to balance out his portfolio because he's not somebody who can take too much risk. So I also gave him a mixed asset, which is like an income plus capital appreciation. So it's a growth portfolio. It's not hugely conservative. Neither it is a very aggressive portfolio, right? But of course, I will be monitoring it. I'll see how it performs and everything, and then maybe we'll have a different position on how market moves later, right? The second example would be of a female, Indian female, single, no dependents, young in 30s, and she already have a financial advisor back in India, have a huge exposure back in India. Okay, and she came across as somebody who could take risk and understands economy in general, but has no time at all. Like she's always traveling for work, so she doesn't stay in Singapore beyond weekends, right? So for her, again, I took, and she also wanted something where she doesn't have to do much and requires something to get totally outsourced. So again, for her, I suggested an ILP where I maintained the health science in Japan,
Mhm.
but I included a fund which focus on semiconductors. Like I also gave her one fund which focuses on Asian small cap.
Okay.
So she gets an exposure to ASEAN, Indonesia, South Korea, Taiwan, and India and China as well. Then some growth stocks in Europe. So these stocks are generally also, if you see, they are also doing a big change in their, along the sustainability agenda.
Okay.
So companies like LV, Adidas, a semiconductor company, ASML Holding, so a bunch of that. But I will also, currently this is their portfolio position, but on iFast, I take more aggressive positions.
Okay.
So for medium term, my exposure would be to some emerging markets like Vietnam, single country exposure to Vietnam and probably Brazil.
Mhm.
I'll take, but very small. I don't want to invest too much into these countries because they are also kind of, you want to see how they are growing, right? So slowly, you increase your position in these. Then I'm very intrigued by small cap Europe as well. So two of these areas that I'm looking at. Also, Japan small cap
Mhm.
is interesting because they are focusing on aging technology, robotics, and new age innovation.
Yeah.
So yeah, so on iFast or on medium term basis, I take more aggressive, calls like these.
Got it. Makes sense.
I'll be
And
very
if you're
keen to know what you guys are doing. What is your exposure in?
well, you can listen to our previous episodes to hear more
Yeah.
about.
Hmm.
But yes, happy to share. I think I am personally most invested in like Indian mutual funds, and
Hmm.
in Singapore, I primarily invest in REITs. I don't do too much of like Singapore or Asian stock specific or sector specific investing. I do have a plan where I choose some single country economies like you mentioned. So I invest a little bit in like Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, China, just to
Hmm.
get like a general Asia exposure. And then I have some stock from my employer, which is US based. So that's my TLDR of.
Actually, I would also suggest you to look into Singapore dividend because most of companies in Singapore are rich in cash.
Hmm.
So, the growth is not so much, but they give you good dividends. So it
Okay.
could be like a parallel income fund going on, on the
Yeah,
side.
yeah, absolutely. I'll look into that. Thanks for the tip.
Hmm.
Um, All right. And to cap it off, I think the last question, and feel free to answer how you need to. What is your own personal portfolio? What does that look like right now?
So it's not very different from these actually, what I currently mentioned. I have an ILP and I also have regular saving plans going on iFast. So
Okay.
what I mentioned just now, like I've taken positions. So I'm a little bit of a risk taker. So I have also taken like Asian small companies, some Europe exposure, some disruptive technology exposure. and health science or biotechnology discovery, all that in my ILP. On iFast, again, and actually even US multi-cap, exposure to different small, mid, and large cap in US. On iFast, I'm also looking into the companies which are European companies which are ESG focused, which are kind of changing their ways around ESG. So that's an interesting fund. Then I also kind of bet on Asia a lot. So there is a fund called Emerging Discovery Fund, which has some Asia exposure.
Right. Thank you so much for spending so much time with us, Aditi. I think this was really, really a wonderful conversation. I personally learned a lot. I think you're doing really great work. We'll absolutely love to hear more from you in future episodes. And I hope you had a great time talking to us today.
Yes.
And,
Yeah, it was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much, Siddharth, firstly for reaching out. And I was dreading actually because I never did a podcast, but this was how you guys had said it. It's quite casual and I really enjoyed it as well.
Thank you.
cool. So that's it, everyone, for our episode today with Aditi. I hope everyone had a great time listening in and learned a lot. We definitely did. We'll look forward to catching you in another episode of Chai Pe Kharcha very, very soon.